Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the truly fascinating first chapter of Ryuho Okawa's book, Progress Thinking. We're going to dive deep into its unique philosophical take on success and personal responsibility. If you've ever felt kind of stuck or wondered why some people seem to just effortlessly build wealth while others struggle, you are in the right place. We're going to explore how tossing out that victim mindset and adopting a much higher perspective can literally turn wealth into a profound force for good. Let's get right into it.
So, quick question for you. Have you ever blamed the economy, your environment, or maybe even your upbringing for a personal setback? I mean, it's a totally familiar feeling, right? A project fails, a promotion falls through, or we miss a financial goal. And our immediate instinct is to look out the window instead of in the mirror. Well, according to the text we're examining today, this very human instinct to point fingers outward, it's actually the first major hurdle to true success. It acts as a mental trap that keeps us completely locked in stagnation. All right, moving on to Section 1, the flawed default, which takes a look at the philosophy of victimhood.
It's incredibly common, isn't it, to point the finger at the government, large corporations, the economy, or even our parents when things go wrong. The text actually details how we routinely use these specific external factors as shields for our own lack of success. People say things like, the government's policies are ruining my chances, or my parents just didn't give me the right education. But the source material points out something really interesting. When people relentlessly use these excuses, it eventually rationalizes this deep-seated envy towards those who are successful. Basically, we convince ourselves that successful people must be doing something bad or unfair, and that our own lack of success, well, that's just a sign of our moral high ground.
And harboring these excuses solidifies what the author calls a philosophy of victimhood. You essentially build an entire worldview around why you just can't succeed. And here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. The text suggests that being trapped in this cycle makes people subconsciously fear failure so much that they actually begin to love poverty. Yeah, you heard that right. They cling to their lack of success because it feels safe, it's familiar, and it protects them from the risk of trying and failing again. So to truly advance, we have to make the active choice to completely discard this philosophy of victimhood.
That brings us to Section 2, the cosmic reframe, a shift in perspective.
To break out of this mental trap, we really have to contrast our narrow, human-centric thinking with a macroscopic, God-centric perspective. Now, human-centric thinking is exactly what we just talked about, getting bogged down in the physical world, focusing on temporary environments, and generating all those worldly excuses. But the text argues that to truly succeed, we need a major viewpoint shift. This means zooming way out and recognizing that the universe itself was fundamentally created by divine thought and intention. So instead of getting stuck in the mud with worldly excuses, we have to adopt this God-centric perspective to really reclaim our agency.
Think about it. When you adopt this God-centric view, those everyday human-scale excuses become incredibly small. If the universe was created by divine thought, then claiming you can't succeed just because of a bad economic cycle kind of misses the point entirely, doesn't it? From this higher perspective, you actually have the power to shape your reality through your own focused thoughts and actions. The whole philosophy of victimhood simply cannot survive in a mind that recognizes this incredible level of personal responsibility.
Let's dive into Section 3, the wealth paradox, redefining money.
So, if we actually control our outcomes through our thoughts and actions, why do we maintain such a complex and, honestly, often heavily negative relationship with money? Society often tells us that wanting wealth is inherently selfish, but what if money is completely separate from those negative connotations? The author makes a really compelling argument here. Wealth is simply a value-neutral resource. It's much like water or electricity. It is neither inherently good nor evil. Its morality depends entirely on the individual wielding it. So really, any evil associated with wealth is just a reflection of the person holding it. If someone with bad intentions gets their hands on wealth, sure, they'll probably use it to do bad things. But conversely, and this is the exciting part, if a person with a good, honest, and humble heart acquires wealth, they elevate it. It transforms from just a neutral resource into a great good for the world, acting as an incredible amplifier for positive change and the happiness of others.
And that leads us right into Section 4, the altruistic resolution, transforming wealth into good.
Okay, here's the practical application, creating a cycle of good wealth. Step 1 starts with generating wealth through honest, genuinely useful work, providing real value to others. Step 2 is maintaining that ethical standard, making absolutely sure you never exploit or steal from others to get ahead. But Step 3 is the magic multiplier. You don't just hoard it. You reinvest that ethically generated wealth to create double, triple, or even 100 times more useful activity for society. In this view, individual financial success actually acts as a powerful engine for broad social progress.
This means accumulating wealth isn't about selfish hoarding at all. It's about gathering the resources necessary to elevate society and contribute to the happiness of everyone around you. It completely reframes the very act of making money. When it's done correctly, with the right mindset, building wealth becomes an inherently altruistic endeavor. It's a way of ensuring you actually have the economic power to help people and affect real positive change rather than just wishing you could do something about it.
Ultimately, this is a profound shift in mindset. By discarding our victimhood, taking true responsibility, and viewing wealth as a neutral tool meant to be multiplied for the greater good, we unlock our true potential. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this powerful quote from the text to really reflect on. Love is the act of giving, gathering wealth to accomplish great work and reinvesting it to generate even more useful activity. When you look at your own goals, are you viewing your potential for success merely as personal gain? Or are you ready to see it as a powerful, absolutely necessary tool for giving back to the world?
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. If you were looking to unpack some really complex ideas and just get straight to the core of fascinating philosophies, well, you're in the exact right place. Today, we're taking a structured, objective look at a highly unique, spiritually driven philosophy of success. We're going to explore a framework that literally completely redefines what it means to grow, both for us as individuals and for entire organizations.
All right, let's just dive right into it. The source material we're analyzing today is Ryuho Okawa's book, Progress Thinking. Now, this book covers a ton of ground, but for this explainer, we're going to laser focus specifically on Chapter 2, which is titled The Path to Progress. In this section, the text totally strips away our usual, materialistic assumptions about success. It lays out a completely different paradigm for growth. It is a really fascinating look at how shifting our internal, spiritual perspective can radically alter our external reality.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit 4 main points. 1. The definition of true progress. 2. Amplifying joy. 3. Hope driving progress. And 4. Practices to realize hope. Let's get to it.
Starting off with Section 1, the definition of true progress. Now, before we can figure out how to achieve progress, we obviously have to understand what it actually means in this context. And this framework immediately challenges our modern baseline. Here, true progress is defined as the soul growing straight toward the infinite and eternal divine. It is explicitly not about self-centered ambition or, just pushing forward through the sheer force of your own ego. Instead, the author posits that true progress is an upward trajectory. It's an alignment. You aren't just moving forward on a flat plane, trying to beat the competition. You're meant to be growing upward, essentially fulfilling a higher spiritual duty.
To help us picture this, the text uses a really vivid natural metaphor. It says it's like a grove of cedar trees stretching straight up to touch the sky. Just picture that for a second. A cedar tree doesn't grow sideways to conquer the forest floor, right? Its natural intended path is straight up. The author argues that human souls are designed the exact same way. If our growth isn't directed upward toward this pure, infinite ideal, then, according to this philosophy, it simply isn't true progress. That brings us to Section 2, Amplifying Joy. So what does all this internal, vertical growth actually look like externally? Well, the text gives us a direct contrast here. Conventional progress usually focuses on mere numerical growth, right? Higher profits, scaling up the number of buildings you own, increasing your employee headcount. But under this framework, true progress is measured entirely by amplifying the shared joy of the people involved. Think about it. If a company doubles its profits, but the people working there and the people they serve aren't experiencing an expansion of joy, then under this philosophy, that numerical growth is essentially empty. True development absolutely must carry a corresponding surge in shared happiness. So how do you actually create that joy? The author gives us a really great analogy here. The text essentially says, don't just watch the game, be the protagonist of your own joy. It explains that, sure, it might be fun to sit back and watch other people dance or watch people play a game of baseball, but the ultimate highest form of joy comes from stepping onto the field and playing the game yourself. To truly amplify joy in the world, you can't just be a passive bystander. You got to take the lead. You have to become the main character, the protagonist in generating that happiness within your own sphere of influence. Moving right along to Section 3, Hope Driving Progress. Now, taking action and being the protagonist requires a lot of energy. So where does that essential fuel come from? The text outlines a strict law of cause and effect, connecting our current actions to our future potential. The author compares the present to a living tree, and the future to the fruit that tree eventually bears. Just as a good tree naturally produces good fruit, our present orientation directly creates our future reality. This means our vision for the future, our grand hope, isn't just wishful thinking. In this framework, hope is the literal blueprint for the fruit that's going to grow. It's this active, driving force that pulls the present forward. To really hammer home how this hope needs to be maintained, the text offers another striking metaphor. Imagine a room, or maybe a Christmas tree, covered in lights. Progress isn't just about adding a few new lights today while letting the old ones slowly burn out and fade to black. That just creates a sense of loneliness and sadness, right? True progress is continuous illumination. It's about keeping the hope burning bright this year, adding to it next year, and maintaining that brilliant glow decades into the future. It's a continuous, compounding brightness that inspires literally everyone around you. All right, let's wrap up with Section 4, Practices to Realize Hope. So how do we actually execute this? The author outlines a very specific mental protocol here, so let's walk through it. Step 1, you must set your mind and fix your heart on a specific, pure ideal. You have to know exactly what you're aiming for. Step 2, intensely concentrate your thoughts. The text really stresses that simply having a vague wish just isn't enough. It requires absolute pointed concentration to manifest that great hope into reality. And crucially, step 3, you must discard evil or selfish attachments. Remember, this goes all the way back to our very first definition. If the goal is purely selfish or ego-driven, it just isn't true progress, and the spiritual foundation basically crumbles. Your concentrated thought has to be aligned with a higher, selfless good. But there's a major trap waiting at the finish line. The text explicitly warns us, beware of arrogance and conceit when your hope is finally realized. It is incredibly easy, once you achieve success through all this hard work and concentration, to just let your ego inflate. The author advises that when success comes, you must receive it with a deeply refreshed, humble, and thankful mind. Because if you allow arrogance to take root, you sever that vertical connection to the divine, and your progress abruptly stops. Humility isn't just a nice character trait here. It's an absolute mechanical requirement to keep the progress going. So we've unpacked a model of success that ignores traditional metrics and instead focuses on upward spiritual growth, amplifying shared joy, continuous hope, and rigorous mental discipline. But, theory only matters if it changes how we actually act. So I want to leave you with this final thought. How can you become the protagonist of amplifying joy in your own sphere today? Rather than just watching the game, what specific action can you take right now to step onto the field and increase the shared joy of the people around you? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this fresh perspective on progress stays with you as you tackle your own goals. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Explainer. So today, we're going to unpack a really fascinating framework for achieving what you might call a truly luminous, carefree mindset. Because let's be real, we all have those days where our thoughts just feel incredibly heavy, right? We get completely bogged down by anxiety, suspicion, or just the sheer everyday complexity of modern life. But what if optimism wasn't just this fleeting mood that comes and goes? What if it was actually a structured architectural choice? To figure that out, we're diving into a book called Progress Thinking. Specifically, we are going to take an analytical look at Chapter 3, which focuses on the core philosophy of a bright life. The author basically gives us this highly visual, metaphorical guide to fundamentally hitting the reset button on how we process the world around us. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the foundation of progress thinking and a bright life. Then learn how to sever thought entanglements, discover what it means to live carefree and transparently, establish why tomorrow is always better, and finally look at spreading the happiness circle. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Progress Thinking and a Bright Life. This is where we lay down the absolute foundation of this optimistic mindset. So what is a bright life? The crucial takeaway here is that the author does not treat this as just, trying to be happy when things miraculously go your way. Not at all. It's a deliberate, disciplined practice. It is the conscious choice to simplify your worldview so much that it essentially mirrors the sun. The goal is to observe, think, and live with absolute brightness. You're making an active choice to absorb that light and reflect it right back out, totally regardless of your current circumstances. But how on earth do we actually do that when our minds are so chaotic? Well, that brings us to section 2, severing thought entanglements, which is all about decluttering the internal mind. The text directly calls out those heavy, complicated thoughts we all carry around. We have this massive tendency to overthink things, right? We build up these incredibly complex webs of anxiety, doubt, and suspicion. Our heads get totally tangled up, and frankly, it is just exhausting trying to navigate all that mental clutter every single day. And the author gives us this incredibly vivid metaphor for dealing with it. Quote, cut through the entanglements in your head, just like sweeping away cobwebs with a broom. Just think about that visual for a second. When you see a dusty cobweb in the corner of your room, you don't stand there carefully untangling it thread by thread, do you? No way. You just grab a broom and sweep the whole shebang away in one swift motion. The suggestion here is that we have to treat our spiraling anxieties the exact same way. Just sweep them away to find some clarity. And once you've swept those cobwebs away, you arrive at the state described in section 3, living carefree and transparently. This is the state of being totally unobstructed. And this brilliantly illustrates what that feels like. The author introduces this visual of a sunlit shallow stream, one that's only about 20 to 30 centimeters deep. Just picture that transparent stream in your mind. The sunlight cuts right through the clear water, hits the riverbed, and literally makes the sand shine like gold. The author equates a carefree life to this exact image. Now, being carefree doesn't mean you just don't care about anything. It means your mind is as transparent and free-flowing as this totally unburdened river. You aren't holding on to grudges, you're not hiding these deep, dark resentments. You are living honestly, out in the open, letting the sunlight reach all the way to the bottom. And to make this even more concrete, the text translates this mental clarity into a physical, highly relatable analogy, taking off a heavy coat. Think about wearing a heavy winter coat stuffed with bricks of burden. This represents living with those complex, suspicious thoughts. It's basically like walking around on a beautiful, sunny day wearing a thick, stifling parka. We literally all do it sometimes, right? Clinging to our worries like it's some sort of protective layer. But the text urges us to drop the bricks and change into light spring clothes. Think about how physically relieving it feels to step outside totally unburdened after a long, freezing winter. That exact feeling of lightness, that's what we should be striving for, mentally, every single day. Now, keeping that light, spring-like mindset requires an anchor, which brings us to section 4, tomorrow is always better. This is the required outlook of hope. The core tenet of this relentless, forward-looking optimism is super straightforward. Tomorrow is more wonderful than today. The day after tomorrow is more wonderful than tomorrow. It's essentially a non-negotiable belief system if you want a bright life. Because without the specific anchor of hope, it is way too tempting to just put that heavy winter coat of anxiety right back on. To drive this home, the text draws on nature again, showing how hope acts exactly like the changing of the seasons. Spring sunlight always comes. That soft sunlight will melt away even the accumulated snow. I absolutely love this because it is a brilliant reminder of inevitability. Look, no matter how deep the snow of hardship or sorrow gets piled up in your life, the spring sunlight of hope will arrive. It always does. And when it does, it gently but effectively melts away everything that was frozen and stuck. This whole mindset is about trusting completely in the arrival of that warmth. Now, you might be wondering, isn't this all just a highly individualized practice? Well, section 5 shows us otherwise. Spreading the happiness circle looks at the external impact and the actual multiplication of joy. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the almost mathematical approach the author takes to happiness. This internal decluttering we've been talking about, it's ultimately designed to be shared. It's not supposed to be kept in a vacuum. Just watch how this scales. It starts super simply. One person shares joy with 2 people. Suddenly, 3 people are better off than 2. From there, the circle expands to 5, then 10 people. And because joy and a bright life in general is so contagious, it spreads like wildfire. It reaches 100, then 1,000 people. It scales up to 10,000. It just keeps compounding and multiplying outward into society. 1 million. To put that into perspective, this underscores the ultimate goal of the entire philosophy, a massive scale of shared happiness, literally an entire society elevated and brightened. And the craziest part, it all originates from just one person's initial choice to sweep away their mental cobwebs, drop those heavy bricks, and simply smile.
Your internal transparency truly dictates the external world's brightness.
So, as we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a direct challenge, a little thought experiment. What heavy winter coat of thought can you take off today? What complex suspicion or tangled up anxiety can you just take a broom to and sweep away right now? Because remember, shedding that weight doesn't just make your own life as bright and carefree as a sunlit stream, it might actually be the exact spark needed to eventually brighten the lives of a million others. Pretty cool to think about, right? Catch you next time.
Welcome to this explainer. Let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating section from Ryuho Okawa's book, Progress Thinking. Specifically, we're zooming in entirely on Chapter 4. It's all about the mind that calls forth happiness, and it offers a highly structured, almost mechanical look at how the human mind operates. What's captivating about this text is that it doesn't just treat happiness as some fleeting random emotion. Instead, it impartially presents the mind as a spiritual machine, one governed by strict laws and invisible mechanics. Today, we're going to break down exactly how this source material maps out the blueprints of that machine.
So, to kick things off, the text hits us with this profound core paradox. Think about it. If someone desperately wants to be happy, wouldn't focusing completely on their own happiness be the most logical way to get there? Well, the author points out a super interesting phenomenon. People who selfishly seek only their own joy often end up experiencing the exact opposite result. They actually chase it away. Our goal today is to look at the mechanical reasons the text provides for why this paradox exists and how to actually solve it.
To help us wrap our heads around this, the author gives us a roadmap of 5 distinct mechanical metaphors: the mind's magnet, universal energy faucets, the power of others' happiness, tuning to God's wavelength, and finally, the proactive power of prayer.
Let's start with Section 1, the mind's magnet. This first concept treats the human mind not as some abstract idea, but as a literal functioning magnet.
The rule here is incredibly concrete. The text calls this the law of harmonious vibration. According to the author, your mind acts exactly like a physical magnet. You know how a magnet pulls an iron sand? Well, your mind actually draws in the fragments of happiness floating around out there in the world. But here's the catch. It only attracts what inherently matches its own energetic nature.
The text asserts that there are absolutely 0 exceptions to this rule. If you've built up a positive magnet in your mind, you're going to effortlessly draw in happiness, success, and positive circumstances. But on the flip side, if your mind carries negative, selfish, or pessimistic tendencies, it literally becomes a negative magnet. It's unavoidably going to attract negative iron sand, things like misfortune and unhappiness. The law works perfectly every single time, whether it's working for you or against you.
Moving to Section 2, universal energy faucets. This brings us to a really visual metaphor in the book about where the energy powering that magnet actually comes from. The universe is described not as an empty void, but as an infinite, overflowing reservoir of brilliant, invisible energy. The author paints a picture of a massive cosmic infrastructure. Imagine these invisible pipes or capillaries branching out from this boundless universal reservoir, and they connect directly into every single person's heart. Everyone has a direct line to this power. So, how do we interact with this cosmic plumbing? The text breaks it down into clear steps. First, that infinite energy is constantly pressing against the pipes, just waiting to flow. Second, your mind acts as the actual faucet controlling that flow. Twist the knob the wrong way, and you shut the water off. But, and here is step 3, if you turn that faucet toward love for others, you mechanically open the valve, letting that boundless energy rush right into your life. That brings us to Section 3, the power of others' happiness. And this leads us directly to the answer for that initial paradox we started with.
How do we make sure we're turning the faucet the right way? According to the text, wishing for the happiness of others is the exact mechanical switch that opens the valve. Now, the author is really careful to clarify a common misunderstanding here. This doesn't mean you have to be completely self-sacrificing or that you should ignore your own well-being. Not at all. It's just that having this outward-facing intention of sharing happiness acts as the right directional turn of the faucet. Try to hoard the water just for yourself, the valve closes. Intend for it to flow out to others, the valve opens up. And ironically, you end up with way more energy flowing through you than you could ever use on your own.
Section 4, tuning to God's wavelength. Here, the author shifts metaphors from plumbing to radio broadcasting to explain what happens when those energetic pipes get blocked.
See, over time, if we aren't careful, the system gets jammed up.
The text explains that human self-interest, ego, and purely selfish desires act just like water scale or rust building up inside a pipe. Initially, the pure energy from the universe flows beautifully, but as this rust of self-interest accumulates, it distorts the flow. It dirties the water, until eventually that magnificent cosmic energy is reduced to a mere muddy trickle.
So how do we clear this rust? The author says we have to tune our minds like a radio dial to God's specific broadcasting frequencies. The text contrasts the clogged pipes caused by selfish desires with the frequencies of a clear flow. You literally have to tune your internal dial to things like love, wisdom, courage, justice, hope, joy, freedom, equality, and progress. By deliberately matching your mind's wavelength to these attributes, you dissolve the rust and restore that clear, infinite flow of energy.
Finally, Section 5, the proactive power of prayer. We know the mechanics now, the magnet, the faucet, the radio dial, but how do we actively put this into practice? The text offers a highly specific tool for this, prayer. But it's super important to note how the author frames this. In this book, prayer isn't portrayed as some passive, helpless wishing. Instead, it's presented as the most proactive, powerful method you have to actively align your mind with those higher wavelengths. It is the literal, physical action you take to turn the dial and open the faucet to the universe's infinite wealth.
To show you exactly how this works, let's look at a beautifully structured prayer pulled straight from page 115 of the source material. It reads, "O God, please grant me a single drop of your ocean-like love." Notice the incredible precision of the language here. It acknowledges the boundless, ocean-like nature of the universe's energy and humbly asks to internalize just a single drop of that specific frequency, in this case, love. Then, the prayer repeats its formula, acting as a clear instruction manual for the mind. It goes, "O God, please grant me a single drop of your ocean-like wisdom." By substituting different attributes into this formula, you are methodically tuning your mind's radio dial to catch the different wavelengths we just talked about. It's a deliberate, mechanical alignment of your spiritual magnet.
The book explains that when all these mechanics are finally aligned, when your mind understands it's a magnet, when the faucet is opened by wishing for the happiness of others, and when your dial is purely tuned through prayer, that's when limitless spiritual and worldly prosperity is realized. The author refers to someone operating in this state as an angel of light, a person whose correctly tuned mind not only fulfills their own maximum hope, but actually serves to elevate the entire world around them.
And that brings us right back to you. We've explored the strict laws of the spiritual magnet, the universal energy plumbing, and the precise frequencies needed to keep it all flowing. Understanding these mechanics is a great first step, but the real challenge is daily application. So based on the blueprint we've unpacked today, ask yourself, which way is your mind's faucet turned right now? Are you accidentally restricting your own flow? Or are you tuned in, open, and ready to let the energy rush in? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this structured look at the mind gives you a powerful new framework for your own reality. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a highly unique piece of philosophy that's going to challenge absolutely everything you think you know about wealth. We're taking the concept way beyond mere money and deep into the realm of true human potential. So, think about this for a second. We almost always equate wealth directly with financial currency, right? We literally check our bank accounts to see how wealthy we are. But what if we're completely missing its true biological and spiritual purpose? What if wealth isn't just numbers on a screen, but an actual vital energy source required for life itself? Well, to answer that fascinating question, we're diving into Chapter 5 of the text you see right here, Progress Thinking. This chapter completely reframes wealth. It asks us to stop viewing it as this selfish, materialistic pursuit and instead see it as a foundational energy that is absolutely necessary for life to flourish.
We've got a really clear roadmap for this today. Starting with the true definition of wealth, looking at the natural law of growth, how wealth transforms into something good, the role of the big tree, and finally, rooting wealth of the heart.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1. The true definition of wealth, focusing on wealth as basic strength.
To really get this, we kind of have to strip away all our modern preconceived notions. The author points out that wealth is actually deeply tied to nature itself. It's the natural desire of literally all living things to grow and thrive. Whether you're talking about plants stretching toward the sun, animals foraging, or human beings building massive cities, it's an innate biological drive to gain power and prosper.
So, here is the absolute crucial takeaway. Wealth is defined in this text as basic strength. It's a totally holistic concept. It's the fundamental power you need for life to prosper. And according to the source, this isn't just cash. It includes your intellect, your financial capability, and your physical stamina. You honestly need the whole shebang combined if you want to accomplish truly great work in the world.
Moving right along to Section 2, the natural law of growth, and a really brilliant forest metaphor.
Now, once you define wealth as basic strength, a big question pops up. What happens when multiple living things strive for it in the exact same environment? The text argues that competition isn't some inherently evil zero-sum game engineered by humanity. Not at all. It naturally arises just because many entities are sharing the same space, all actively seeking that vital energy they need to grow. It's just the basic natural physics of existence. And this perfectly sets up the book's core metaphor. Think of a dense, wild forest. Some trees are inevitably going to grow taller, stretch their branches way out, and outpace the others. Because of that, they cast shade on the smaller shrubs below them. Those shrubs are left in the shade, unable to reach those same massive heights. Which brings us to a really interesting philosophical point in Section 3, Transformation into Good Wealth, moving beyond good and evil.
You see, this natural inequality, the tall tree getting the sun while the shrubs are shaded, brings up a notoriously tough moral question. Is the tall tree evil just for taking up the sunlight? Historically, as the text points out, people have often viewed the wealthy with deep resentment. There's this huge tendency in human history to mistakenly equate equal poverty with true fairness. The assumption that if someone has a lot, they must have stolen it from someone else. But the source proposes a completely different, really bold perspective. It suggests that it's actually far better for a big tree to grow incredibly successfully so it can accomplish great work for the entire ecosystem. That is way better than everyone remaining equally small and just merely existing without producing anything monumental.
Let's see how that actually plays out. In Section 4, the role of the big tree in sheltering the ecosystem. So, how does a forest metaphor apply to our modern world? The text directly links this big tree concept to human society, specifically focusing on how visionary entrepreneurs and business leaders act as these massive trees in our economic ecosystem. The whole argument here is that excellent, capable leaders aren't just hoarding sunlight to line their own pockets. By utilizing their accumulated basic strength, remember, that's their intellect, stamina, and capital, they build massive enterprises, and in doing so, their wide branches provide shelter, stability, and livelihoods for thousands of employees and their families. When wealth is used to sustain society like this, the text says it transforms from a selfish pursuit into an overwhelming good. But how do you sustain that? That's Section 5, Rooting Wealth of the Heart, which is the foundation of wisdom. Think about it. A tree absolutely cannot sustain massive outward branches or provide all that shelter if it doesn't have incredibly deep, strong roots holding it steady. The source explains that material wealth, those outward branches, must be deeply grounded in what it calls wealth of the heart. And this inner wealth, it's ultimately defined as wisdom. We aren't just talking about raw information or book smarts here, but knowledge that has been thoroughly tested, applied, and proven through actual real-world experience. Building this inner wealth, this wisdom, takes daily, steady effort. The text actually outlines a really clear path for us. First, you have to constantly study and read excellent, profound thoughts, meaning avoid getting bogged down by fleeting, superficial media. Second, build the economy of your own home. That means maintaining strong physical and mental reserves so you don't burn out. And finally, you have to intentionally direct all this gathered power to serve society and genuinely aim to make others happy. So, to wrap up today's explainer, true wealth is absolutely not just the balance sitting in your bank account. It is the holistic, basic strength, your physical, intellectual, and financial power combined, that you accumulate not just to elevate yourself, but to positively impact and shelter the vast ecosystem of society around you. Which leaves us with a pretty powerful final thought to ponder as you go about your week. How are you going to cultivate your own deep roots and basic strength? What specific steps will you take today to become a big tree that eventually shelters those around you? It's a lot to think about. Keep growing, and we will see you next time.
All right, let's get right into it. Welcome back, everyone, to another explainer. Today, we are breaking down a truly fascinating framework for achieving lasting success.
Now, we spend so much time talking about personal productivity, right? Life hacks, optimizing schedules, basically squeezing every last ounce of efficiency out of our own daily routines. But what happens when you hit the absolute ceiling of what one single person can actually do? Well, today, we're exploring a philosophy that shifts the focus entirely from the individual over to the collective. We're going to look at how genuine, enduring success is actually built on the foundation of how we interact with, uplift, and truly encompass the people around us. So think about this for a second. Can one genius do the work of 1,000 people? It's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? We definitely tend to romanticize the whole myth of the lone genius, the singular visionary who just single-handedly changes the world. But today's source material challenges that idea head-on. The author argues that mathematically and practically speaking, no matter how brilliantly talented you are, one person simply cannot do the work of 100, let alone 1,000 people. If you want to achieve anything of massive scale or significance, you literally have to break free from this illusion of solo supreme power. Which brings us to our source text for today, Progress Thinking by Ryuho Okawa. Specifically, we're going to be breaking down the core concepts outlined in Chapter 6. In this chapter, the author lays out a really comprehensive philosophy that he calls successful humanics. We'll be walking through this text to understand exactly how he constructs this roadmap to success, a roadmap that relies heavily on mastering human relationships and building personal character. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the limits of individual power. Second, the quality and length of effort. Third, the conditions for inspiration. And finally, true charm and magnanimity. All right, let's dive into Section 1, the limits of individual power. So as a starting point for this entire philosophy, we have to recognize our own boundaries. When people finally realize they need a team to scale their vision, a super common trap is to start viewing people as just tools. The text explicitly warns against using others merely for your own personal success. The author argues that this is just a massive error right out of the gate. Instead, the foundation of successful humanics is serving others for mutual success. True success in human relations has to be rooted in a genuine desire to serve and contribute to the people around you, rather than just exploiting them to get ahead. And to illustrate what happens when you get that balance wrong, the author uses this amazing, really vivid metaphor of the mud boat. Picture trying to sail out into the open ocean in a boat made entirely of dried mud. If you try to achieve massive success by relying entirely on the talents and efforts of others, without having secured your own solid individual foundation first, well, you're essentially sailing a mud boat. As you get farther out into the deep, turbulent waters of ambition and stress, that boat is going to dissolve and you will sink. You absolutely have to be a capable, grounded individual yourself before you can ever effectively lead others. Moving right along to Section 2, Quality and Length of Efforts. So, if we aren't all born as once-in-a-generation geniuses, how do we actually build that solid foundation so our boat doesn't just melt in the water? The text addresses this very real anxiety of lacking innate, world-changing talent. And the answer, well, it isn't a quick fix. One day or even short-term bursts of effort just aren't enough. In fact, the author notes that trying to cram a lifetime of effort into a few days will literally just break you, physically and mentally. Compensating for a lack of natural genius requires a much longer horizon. 5 years, 10 years, or even longer. It's a long game of continuous, steady accumulation. True success is directly proportional to the quality and length of your effort. But there's a really vital caveat the author makes here. This effort has to be humble. Think about it. If you have a little bit of talent and you let it make you arrogant, you're just going to make enemies and close doors. But if you start from a place of humility, acknowledging that you need to work hard, and you unyieldingly accumulate that high-quality effort over a decade, that is how you gradually turn the people around you into strong allies. Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, Conditions for Inspiration. Okay, so what actually happens to your brain after years of that humble, unyielding effort? You don't just become a hard worker. Your mind fundamentally changes. The text introduces this highly specific definition of inspiration, or hirameki in Japanese. Now, we usually think of inspiration as a random lightning bolt, right? Just a lucky accident. But the author defines it completely differently. Here, inspiration is an earned skill. It's a byproduct. It only happens consistently when you've built a high foundational ability through that decade of effort we just talked about, and this is crucial, when you combine that ability with a sincere, loving interest in solving problems for others. The text breaks this down into 3 specific keys for unlocking that consistent inspiration. First up, that high foundational ability, because without it, your ideas are really just detours that waste everybody's time and money. Second, a diverse interest in others. The author suggests that when you genuinely care about a wide variety of people and you actually want to make them happy, your mind naturally generates a wider variety of brilliant ideas to serve them. And third, maintaining a bright, hopeful, and constructive mindset. If you're super cynical and just view the world in gray, fresh ideas simply won't come to you. A bright mind attracts bright ideas, and maybe more importantly, it attracts the kind of people who want to help you execute them. Finally, let's hit section 4, true charm and magnanimity. This right here sets up the absolute pinnacle of the successful humanics philosophy. How do you become the kind of leader that 1,000 people actually want to rally behind and work for? Well, the author lists these exact prerequisites for a truly charming leader. First, you've got to have that genuine capability we talked about, so you aren't a mudboat. Second, you exude cheerfulness because, let's face it, nobody wants to follow a leader who is perpetually gloomy. Third, you radiate life force and health. And fourth, and this is arguably the most important concept in the whole chapter, you must exhibit a large vessel of magnanimity, or hauyoryoku in Japanese. It's that rare capacity to truly encompass and embrace others. To explain what happens when you lack this magnanimity, the author uses this incredibly striking visual metaphor, the tragedy of the sharp razor. Imagine a leader who is brilliant, incredibly sharp, and highly capable, but their vessel is tiny. They have zero patience and they're incredibly narrow-minded. The text argues that a leader like this becomes like a literal razor blade. Because they are so sharp, they end up cutting down the talents of the people around them. They spot every tiny flaw, they criticize every single mistake, and ultimately they bleed their own team dry. It's this really tragic scenario where high intelligence actually destroys the collective potential of the group. To counter that razor mentality, the text offers this really beautiful quote. Magnanimity is not merely sweet gentleness, but a capacity to embrace many people, akin to how a sweet candy wraps around a center. True leadership isn't just about being blindly nice to everyone. It's about having a structure large enough and a demeanor sweet and resilient enough to wrap around and utilize the wildly diverse and, yeah, sometimes messy talents of lots of different people. You absorb their flaws and you amplify their strengths. So the big takeaway we get from Chapter 6 is this. Successful humanics is described as the absolute royal road to success. It moves us completely away from that hyper-individualistic grind. It argues that true, lasting achievement isn't about how bright your single star shines, but about how well you deeply value, nurture, and encompass the human relationships all around you. I want to leave you with this final, lingering question to really chew on today. How large is your vessel? Are you currently operating like a sharp razor, maybe inadvertently cutting down the potential of your team or your peers because you demand perfection? Or are you actively doing the long, humble work to expand your vessel, building that magnanimity required to truly elevate everyone around you? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next one. Welcome back to the Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a really fascinating philosophy of sustainable personal growth. We're zeroing in on the framework laid out in Chapter 7 of Ryuho Okawa's text, Progress Thinking. Now, this chapter is beautifully titled, Only Flight, or Soaring High, and it tackles a challenge I think literally all of us face in today's hyperfast world. I mean, we all want to grow, right? We all want to succeed and move quickly. But how do we actually pull that off without losing our minds or our grounding in the process? Well, this text offers a highly specific, structured answer to exactly that. Okawa kicks things off with a massive jolt of energy, declaring, "Now the time for progress has arrived." The text proposes that a miraculous momentum for major advancement is sitting right in front of us. And you know that feeling, right? It acknowledges that when we see rapid development happening, whether it's in our own lives or out in the world, it brings this incredible rush of excitement. It's that sheer joy when everything finally starts clicking into place and moving forward. But that exact excitement instantly brings up the central tension of the entire text. When you are moving at breakneck speed, how in the world do you maintain control? Basically, how do you avoid crashing? The author gives a pretty stark warning here. Being in the absolute middle of a massive wave of progress is actually when you need to be the most careful, because it's incredibly easy to just get swallowed up whole by your own momentum. Which brings us right to Section 1, the energy of progress and the calm eye. This part is all about balancing two completely opposite internal forces. The text argues that in the very midst of high-speed progress,
Your biggest danger is just being tossed around by the raw energy of it all. People can become almost frantic or kind of dizzy with excitement when things really start taking off. But the author states very clearly that even within that maddening excitement, you absolutely must possess what he calls a calm eye. So on one side, you've got the heat of progress. And the text uses a brilliant metaphor here. It says that when people get overheated with ambition, they tend to just start firing bullets blindly into the dark. They think that as long as they're shooting, as long as they are frantically doing something, they're making progress. It might briefly cure their anxiety, but ultimately, it's just a waste of ammunition. Then, on the flip side, we have the coolness of reflection, that calm eye. This is your rationality. It's the objective self-analysis that pauses and asks, okay, where exactly am I flying? Where is this actually going to land? It's all about taking aim carefully so your energy is used effectively, rather than just acting out of sheer undirected excitement.
So the main takeaway here is this: the hotter your passion, the cooler your mind must be to stay on track. Simply put, this philosophy insists that your internal temperature has to remain incredibly cool, rational, and deliberate, precisely when your external momentum is at its absolute hottest. Because without that cool, reflective mind evaluating your trajectory, the text warns that you just won't be able to maximize all that amazing kinetic energy.
Okay, but how do we actually ground this intense, rational progress in our everyday reality? Let's get into Section 2, the power of small daily love. According to the teachings here, progress isn't just about cold metrics, hitting quarterly targets, or endless expansion. Without love acting as the foundational prototype, growth is completely hollow. In fact, the text literally describes progress without love as being like an empty shell. True progress, Okawa argues, is deeply intertwined with a genuine desire to alleviate the burdens of other people and actually bring them happiness. And what's really fascinating is that he doesn't leave love as some abstract high-in-the-sky concept. He insists that this essential love is found in the tiniest micro-actions of your day. It's handing over a single book to someone with genuine care. It's writing a person's name, character by character, with total intention. He even goes so far as to ask, can you not put love into the actual physical pressure of your finger as it attaches a postage stamp to an envelope? Or maybe just in a few words of greeting during a routine phone call? By zeroing our energy in on these tiny, hyper-specific moments of care, we anchor our rapid upward flight in deep, sustainable human connection. So love isn't just a nice feeling you have. It is the practical, daily driving force of true progress. It's basically the mechanism that ensures as we soar higher and faster, we don't detach from the humanity that gives our work its meaning in the first place. And that natural grounding leads us right into Section 3, confidence backed by true ability. So how do we evaluate ourselves as we move forward? The text draws a really sharp line here between empty ego and what it defines as true confidence. True confidence isn't just believing in yourself because you read a motivational poster and feel like it. It is strictly earned through tangible results and a genuine sense of fulfilling your purpose. If your self-belief isn't backed up by real-world performance, the text warns that to everyone else, you just look conceited and arrogant.
Now, to gain this true confidence, you have to bring back that calm eye of reflection we talked about in Section 1 and use it to look inward. The author points out a super common pitfall. Our self-evaluations are usually completely one-sided. We either bust out a magnifying glass to obsess over every single failure, which just leads to a dark, depressed mind, or we completely ignore our flaws and inflate our egos. Objective self-evaluation, which means seeing yourself fairly and squarely, is literally the only way to build accurate self-awareness.
It breaks down like this. Conceit relies on ignoring feedback and living in a subjective delusion with zero tangible results backing it up. True confidence, on the other hand, relies on accurate self-awareness and steady, measurable progress. It's the exact alignment of your internal ability with your external results. It's about constantly checking yourself, asking, do I really have the ability I think I do? And then just letting the results speak for themselves. This perfect equilibrium is exactly what makes sustainable growth possible.
All right, let's pull all of these philosophical threads together in our final section, A Great Flight to the Future.
Okawa's vision of soaring high is absolutely not a reckless launch into the unknown. It is a beautifully, carefully orchestrated flight. Yes, it's powered by the intense heat of burning passion, but it is strictly guided by the cool, rational eye of reflection. It is tethered to reality and sustained by those daily micro-practices of love, literally down to how you press a stamp onto an envelope. And finally, it's stabilized by an earned confidence that actually matches your true ability.
And that is the core message of Chapter 7 from Progress Thinking. It offers a really profound reimagining of what it means to be truly successful. It teaches us that you actually don't have to choose between moving fast and staying grounded. By maintaining a cool head and a warm heart, you can absolutely navigate the rapid changes of the world with incredible effectiveness. So as you jump back into your own rapid stream of progress today, I want to leave you with this final thought. Take a second and ask yourself, are you just firing bullets into the dark out of sheer excitement, or are you actually aiming with a calm eye and a steady hand? Where are you directing your energy today? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this framework helps you navigate your own incredible flight forward. Welcome to today's explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us because today we are unpacking a highly profound, highly structured philosophical text. If you've ever found yourself wondering how different spiritual frameworks categorize the universe, life, and, well, what happens next, you are in for a seriously fascinating ride. Okay, let's dive right into this. We're going to look closely at a text that systematically maps out the actual mechanics of the soul. We'll break down these complex ideas step by step so you can clearly see the architecture of this entire worldview. Now, I want you to consider this. What if life on Earth is literally just a temporary classroom for the soul? And what if true death is fundamentally different from what modern medicine tells us? It's a pretty provocative hook, right? It asks us to completely suspend our standard biological understanding of human existence. You see, the framework we're exploring today doesn't just ask us to passively believe in an afterlife. It presents a highly detailed, mechanical explanation for how our souls operate across centuries, aiming to radically shift how we view our everyday struggles. The source material we're distilling today is Ryuho Okawa's book, Progress Thinking. Specifically, we're going to focus our explainer entirely on Chapter 8. This specific chapter is remarkable because of how systematically it breaks down the cosmology of the soul, the mechanics of reincarnation, and the exact nature of the spiritual world. Now, we aren't here to debate the theology, but rather to impartially map out exactly what the author claims. By relying directly on the text, we're going to uncover the precise blueprint this book offers for human existence. Part 1. The Blueprint of the Soul, the Cycle of Reincarnation. Okay, we're shifting right into the mechanics of how the text claims human souls actually operate within the cycle of reincarnation. The author doesn't just vaguely say, we come back. He provides a very specific numerical structure. It's the concept of the soul as a team. According to the text, a soul isn't just born in the womb. It exists long before conception. But here is the major twist. A human soul is actually part of a 6-person spiritual collective, 1 core soul and 5 branch souls. And they don't all come to Earth at once. Instead, these members take turns reincarnating every few hundred years. While 1 is down here on Earth navigating life, the other 5 are in the spirit world, sharing those earthly experiences in real time. Why? Well, the text states the ultimate goal of this entire system is the continuous accumulation of wisdom for the whole group. The material puts it super clearly, reading, the human soul is not just a single spiritual body, but a group, sharing experiences to become wisdom. This completely changes the paradigm of personal growth, doesn't it? In this framework, you are literally never learning alone. Your struggles, your victories, those quiet moments of realization, they aren't just for you. They're being instantly uploaded, so to speak, to your spiritual collective. Every earthly experience contributes to a much greater spiritual database. Part 2. Earthly illusions, forgetting the divine promise. So, you might be wondering, if this system is so perfect and collaborative, why is human life often so incredibly difficult? Well, the source asserts that human suffering actually stems from a profound amnesia. The text explicitly says that we are not fragile clay dolls made to simply break and disappear. We are eternal souls. The core issue, according to Chapter 8, is that upon being born into this physical dimension, humans forget their spiritual origins and the divine promises they made before birth. We get totally wrapped up in the physical world and lose sight of the fact that we're actually in a temporary training ground. And this leads to a pretty deep conflict in the world today. The text critiques modern society for trying to determine what is right and wrong simply by counting heads, majority rule. In stark contrast, it argues that spiritual truth and righteousness cannot be voted on. True correctness, according to this worldview, requires aiming for eternal, divine teachings. The author impartially critiques our reliance on social consensus, basically stating that just because a lot of people believe something doesn't actually make it spiritually true. Part 3. Redefining Death, the Silver Cord. This disconnect between earthly consensus and spiritual reality leads us to what is probably the most provocative part of this explainer, a complete redefinition of human death. How we define the end of life has massive implications in this philosophy. The author draws a very sharp line between medical death, where brainwaves or the heart stops, and spiritual death. The text argues vehemently against the standard medical definition. Instead, it introduces the idea of a silver cord, an invisible, ethereal line connecting the physical body to the soul. According to the text, a human has only truly transitioned when this silver cord is permanently severed. Physical organ failure absolutely does not equal the soul's departure.
If you look directly at page 190 of the original text, the author explicitly addresses the modern medical definition of brain death, pushing back against it hard. The text claims that if we view humans merely as biological machines, we make grave mistakes at the end of life. The soul, the author insists, lingers until that silver cord finally snaps, which can actually happen a day or so after the heart has already stopped beating.
Part 4. The Threat of Ignorance, Earthbound Spirits, and NDEs.
Now, why is knowing the exact timing of death so absolutely crucial? Well, the text outlines some incredibly intense consequences for ignoring these spiritual truths. To understand the stakes here, the author first points to near-death experiences, or NDEs. The text views these not as biological hallucinations caused by a dying brain, but as deliberate educational events. Under ideal circumstances, souls leave the body painlessly and are aided by beings of light. The author claims that the spirit world actually orchestrates these near-death experiences globally, sending souls back to their bodies specifically to teach the living that the afterlife is real and to get them prepared for it. But what happens if you just don't know? The book's framework states, if you die without knowing the existence of the soul, you have nowhere to go and become a wandering soul. The author believes that spiritual ignorance isn't just a matter of having different opinions. It is deeply, actively dangerous to the individual soul. If you firmly believe that death is just a blackout into nothingness, your soul will literally not know how to detach and move on. The text lays out a highly specific and, frankly, a very intense chain of events. First, an unaware soul experiences medical death. Because they don't believe in an afterlife, their soul clings in a panic to the physical body, and that silver cord remains intact. Next, and this is where the text takes a highly controversial stance, the author claims that if the body is cremated or if organs are harvested for donation during this time, the soul actually feels the trauma because they are still attached. Finally, this immense shock and confusion traps them right here on Earth as a wandering, earthbound spirit. We present this strictly to illustrate exactly why the author argues that knowing spiritual truth is a critical matter of spiritual survival.
Part 5. The Solution, the Bodhisattva Ideal.
All right, so having established the mechanics of the soul and the real dangers of ignorance, the author doesn't just leave us hanging in fear. There is an ultimate, highly positive goal here, the ideal of the Bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is defined as an enlightened individual who deliberately steps away from their own ego. By accumulating spiritual wisdom over those multiple lifetimes, remember that group of 6 we talked about earlier, the soul eventually reaches a completely selfless state. They realize the absolute truth of eternal life, and rather than serving themselves, they dedicate their entire existence to guiding and saving the world around them. And how do you actually reach that state? Well, it starts with education. The author redefines a very common legal phrase here. The text states that the ultimate right to know is not about political secrets or earthly news. It is about understanding the truth of the afterlife. True salvation and the ability to help save others requires deep spiritual education. You have the fundamental right, the author argues, to know that your life is eternal and to truly understand the rules of the realm you will inevitably return to.
Which brings us to our final thought. We've mapped out a highly specific blueprint today. A 6-person soul collective, the severing of the silver cord, the real dangers of modern amnesia, and the noble path of the bodhisattva. If our earthly lives are really just one brief chapter in a continuous cycle of gaining wisdom, how will you choose to live your chapter today? Whether you take this text quite literally or as a profound metaphor for living selflessly, this structural philosophy definitely challenges us to look far beyond our immediate daily frustrations. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.